Welcome to Fuzzybutts and Friends. I'm your host, Luke Robinson, your big dog, and we're glad to have back this week our occasional co-host, the executive director of Puppy Up Foundation, Ginger Morgan. How are you, Ginger?
I am much better than I was last week.
Yes,
Doing well.
Yes, you weren't feeling very well. I got to tell you funny before we get to the show is
Of course.
one of the guests that I interviewed in your absence after we filmed the show, she made the passing compliment and comment. She said, "Well, you see, you didn't need Ginger in the first place," and I'm like, "Wow."
Yeah.
Make a note of that, and if we ever have to cut costs, you're the first to go. So.
Yeah, and you know what? And I know who that guest was. So yeah, payback.
She's good. She's good people. She's protected. All right. Well, we have such a great diversity on Fuzzybutts and Friends. Both researchers, both veterinarians. We've had some shelter people from folks from the shelters and animal rescues, and today. It's a great honor for me to have someone with a business background, because that's my background, but also to talk about some very, very important work that they're doing. The CEO of Elias Animal Health, it is Tammie Wahaus. Tammie, welcome to Fuzzybutts and Friends.
Thank you, Luke. It's great to be here.
We're glad to have you here. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk about the work that you guys are doing. So let's start off. You come, a lot of people we have on this show come from the science background, and you're the CEO of Elias, and you have the business background. So how did you and Elias? What is your background, and how did you become involved with Elias?
Yeah, so that's a great story. Like we talked before, I'm a CPA by my original profession. I was a partner with one of the major accounting firms and had a very long career there. When I left public accounting, I started doing work with small entrepreneurial companies and was introduced to a project for a company in the life sciences industry that was developing an immunotherapy for the treatment of cancer. And as I worked with that company, it's known as TVEX Biomedical, I got back to my roots and said, wait a minute, we have an opportunity here to bring a technology forward that will help humans, but also because of the unique characteristics of this particular therapy, we believed we could bring it forward and help companion animals as well. So I was the CFO of TVEX and put together a business plan and went to a lead investor with the permission of the board of directors and said we wanted to spin out an animal health company with this technology. And the lead investor really liked the business plan. And so off we went to raise money to see if we could create an animal health company and begin to create improvements in the companion animal oncology space.
What a wonderful story. And another thing I like, I'm so happy to have you on the show, is that you're based out of Kansas City and you guys have something called the corridor there. And wow, you're doing some really exciting and innovative things there in animal science and research, aren't you?
We are. That was actually one of the very first things that I said. If we can't do it, no one can do it, right? We're sitting here in the animal health corridor. We're flanked on, the west by a great Kansas State University, flanked on the east by University of Missouri, and we've got great universities in Iowa, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Arkansas. So if we can't get the resources here, who can?
Right, and we have to in Mizzou. I think I know they hate that term, but I can never remember. Is it University of Missouri or Missouri University? I always get that. I'm dyslexic, so I just say Mizzou. I know they don't like it, we funded some research there. The Puppy Up Foundation has, and Flesner as well. And I think Flesner was involved with one of your studies. Is that correct? I saw his name on
He
one of your
is.
papers.
Yeah. Dr. Brian Flesner was involved in our preliminary study, the one we call ECI OSA 1, as well was Dr. Carolyn Henry, who was actually one of the first veterinarians that I met back in 2015 when I started this project. Probably actually it was 2014. And Dr. Jeffrey Bryan. They were a great team to work with. And we continue to work with them today.
Well, yeah, Jeffrey and Carolyn, and we know them very, very well. Been to many VCS conferences with them, and they're just a delight. Mizu, and they're just so great. They treated Ginger. They treated Lily and
Lily.
Right.
Yeah.
I love Mizu. Wonderful folks. And the corridor too. So I've been there a number of times, and we've talked about Puppy Up Foundation having a bigger presence in the corridor, but we can certainly talk about that offline.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Let's do that, because it's just so exciting. And I come from, my background, just real briefly, is, and I think I mentioned this prior to the show, is in helping high-tech and biotech companies in Austin and San Antonio. And that's very similar to the corridor, and it's all about collaboration with communities, and especially as far as research and innovation is concerned. So I'm very excited to talk to you about that offline. And I'm a huge nerd, and as Ginger knows, I can go down some badger nests. So so out of that great nest, that a hive of technology and innovation, tell us how Elias was started, and what is the vision of Elias Animal Health?
Sure. So the overarching vision for the company and everyone who's here is to improve the cancer treatment outcomes in veterinary patients through the advancement of new innovative therapies. We work very closely with the oncology community. Our goal is to be known as the trusted cancer specialists in animal health. We value open, honest, and transparent communications. And we really value the innovation that is taking place on the human health side, and we're staying very close to our human health collaborators, both at TVAX as well as other companies where we have either already in-licensed the technology or are looking to in-license their technology. But we really feel that the translation of all of the advances that are happening on the human health side, it's critically important that we find those technologies that also have the ability to come to the animal health market and be efficacious, right? We want to be able to improve the outcomes for dogs, but also be affordable for pet owners.
Does that really technology transfer is sort of your growth model then, is how you intend to grow the pipeline? Am I correct?
So we're actually approaching it on a multi-fold point of view. The immunotherapy that we have is what they call an autologous therapy. And it's personalized medicine, which means we're taking tumor cells from the patient. Well, we're actually taking them from the surgeons, of course. And we're manufacturing a personalized treatment for that dog. That immunotherapy, because of the fact that we're using the cancer cells, we're able to manufacture that treatment for any type of cancer. So we'll expand the pipeline by moving from osteosarcoma into other cancer types with our current immunotherapy. We'll also expand the pipeline by looking at other immunotherapies that can work in combination with our adoptive T-cell therapy, but also potentially work as a standalone treatment. Every case is unique, every cancer is unique, and most researchers and scientists believe that the way we're going to cure more cancers in dogs and in humans is through combinations of immunotherapies. So we're looking to build that portfolio to make as many of those options available to veterinarians as possible.
That's exciting.
It really is. We're kind of jumping around, and I guess there really is no order to approach this because there's so much to cover and talk about. Because I, like you, am a tremendous proponent and believer in the potential of immunotherapy. Because I read the Emperor of All Maladies, the biography of cancer. Have you read that book?
I have read that book. Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's powerful. It's powerful. It's fascinating that cancer gets its own biography. But more important, I think the author, and I can't recall his name. We need to get him on Fuzzybutts and Friends. But does a perfect job of talking about the three different treatment modalities and how medieval they really are, their origins. And yes, we've become less medieval in chemotherapy. Well, it began with radical surgery, as we know, just cut the tumor out and as much tissue, surrounding tissue as you can, radical surgery, whether it's vasectomy or whatever you're cutting out. That was the first, and it went to chemo or radiation or chemo. I can't recall the order of which, but radiation has its own tremendous side effects, including which is causing additional cancer, as you know, and then chemotherapy, which causes a whole host of side effects. So you have really those have been the three arrows in our quiver in terms of cancer treatments for almost the past 100 years, it seems.
That's correct.
Yeah, so immunotherapy I'm a big believer. So please talk about that. Let's talk about cancer in dogs and cancer and osteosarcoma specifically, and then we can talk about immunotherapy and then how your technology, your proprietary, your IP is focusing on osteosarc in dogs. So let's start off with cancer dogs and osteosarc.
Sure. So one of the most shocking statistics to me when I started looking into this almost 10 years ago was the number of dogs that are diagnosed each year with cancer. And in the US, there are over 90 million dogs. The estimates are that there are more than 6 million dogs diagnosed each year. That's nearly, 1 in 15 dogs each year. So if you just think about it. And until recently, there have been very few advances in treatment options available certainly in the last 40 years. Another very shocking statistic is that it is the #1 cause of death in dogs over the age of 2. And the third one is that 1 in 4 dogs will develop cancer in their lifetime. So it's like you just keep rolling those numbers around in your head and you say, why haven't we been able to produce some breakthroughs? So, when you are, we did some further research and, to look at what are some of the most prevalent cancers in dogs, and that includes the obvious one that many of us know about, lymphoma. We know about mast cell tumor. And osteosarcoma is right up there as one of the most prevalent cancers in dogs. And in particular, it affects the large and giant breeds disproportionately than the small breeds. So if you think about Great Danes, Greyhounds, Labradors, Golden Retrievers, Great Pyrenees, Boxers, these dogs with the long leg bones are disproportionately affected by osteosarcoma.
But hold on 1 second. I before you jump into that, I want to just walk back just a little bit, and I want to talk about the incidence of cancer in dogs, because this is kind of really very, for us, kind of a clear and present issue here at Fuzzybutts and Friends, because you're right, the numbers are staggering. I myself, I'm not sure if you know my history, all 3 dogs that I've lost to cancer. First was osteosarc, second was nasal adenocarcinoma, and the third was just last September was metastatic mast cell cancer. But the numbers are so high where you have Ginger herself has lost 8 dogs to cancer. And I've met people on my travels, families on my travels, that have lost like all 6 of their golden retrievers, which is just another one of the high incidence breeds. And so I think a lot, Tammie, about dogs in the future of dogs in our society. And I recently had Phil Bergman on the show. He heads up clinical trials at Mars VCA. He's a great guy. And I kind of presented this scenario to Phil. And I said, imagine, Phil, in 20 years from now, if we can't get the numbers down at all. And in fact, if they keep spiking, we see 6 million dogs a year go to 8 million dogs. And now it's, instead of 1 out of 4, Tammie, it's 1 out of every 3, 1 out of every 2 of your dogs are getting cancer. And now it's just a coin flip, right? Then you're going to have pet parents that are going to have, or pet parents of the future now, making some very, very difficult decisions out there about whether they should even adopt a pet or get a pet in the first place. And in fact, I just did a special episode of Fuzzybutts and Friends. There was a Bloomberg Economics article out from a very irresponsible journalist that was talking about how, in this high inflationary time, you should consider about denying or avoiding treating your pet's cancer with chemotherapy, which is just horrific advice, and it goes against everything that we've done here in veterinary medicine and veterinary oncology over the past many, many decades, since the days of Steve Withrow. So I don't want to get into that, but we're going to see a lot more of those, because there are some people out there that have this limited resource mentality. And so where I'm going with this rather briefly is that you're right. If we're just going to be treating with the 3 different treatments and we're not going to get the numbers down, then the world of our companion animals is going to look very, very different in 10 or 20 years. Don't you feel the same way?
I think I think there's certainly a concern about how are people going to pay for therapies, and something that we think about every single day. Practically every penny that we spend is thought about very carefully to ensure that we can keep our product and the products we continue to develop affordable. I think I actually spent some years in a previous career in the insurance industry, and I think you're going to see more and more pet owners purchase medical insurance for their dogs, and that way they can spread that, just like your auto insurance and your homeowner's insurance, you can spread that cost over time, and then it's there when you need it. I'm a dog lover. At the moment, we have 3 Labradors, and
This is full of excitement.
oh my goodness, yeah. So we have the 11-year-old, the 6-year-old, and the not quite 2-year-old, who, by the way, happens to be the biggest of the 3, and weighing in at close to 80 pounds.
Goodness.
Believes he is a lap dog. And I think while I did actually see the podcast where you were talking with Dr. Bergman, and I reflected on those comments, and I think about that almost 2-year-old, and I don't think there's anything that can replace the spontaneity and the joy and the happiness that this almost 2-year-old Labrador delivers every single day.
You're absolutely right. You are right. I agree with you 1,000%, because it's certainly not going to change in my life and the things that I do, and that as I continue to lose dogs, I'll continue to adopt more so long as I can. But I'm a bit of an alarmist, and I tend to forecast very far in the future, but that's a good thing. We need people like me, because there are trends that some people need to be looking that can start occurring, and they snowball and they kind of slide. There's a historian, or not a historian, but a guy has a history podcast named Dan Carlin. He uses a term called sliding into inevitability, and we don't want to get to that point. But you're right. I believe in the power of the puppy for sure. And what's great about what Elias Animal Health is doing, and is you're focusing on two things. One, the technology that represents, I believe, the future of cancer therapeutics, and two, one of the big cancers, osteosarcoma. So let's get back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, unfortunately, osteosarcoma, does predominantly occur in the leg bones. And, those dogs are often going to require amputation due to the bone damage that the osteosarcoma has done before it's diagnosed. And that bone damage can be extremely painful for dogs. And so it's really important, for pet owners to seek professional help as soon as they can. Most dogs, that's a very difficult situation for a pet owner to be faced with. Can I have my dog amputated? How will he or she, function? And it really, most dogs, what the veterinarians will say is most dogs, including the giant breeds, do very well as tripods. But of course, they've got to do a thorough examination, make sure that he is of sound body otherwise. But and for our therapy, we are after as many of those cancer cells that we can get at from the surgery. So it's really important, we can produce the best possible treatment if you give us as much of the cancer tissue as possible, because cancer is a mutation of normal cells. And just by definition, mutation means we're not all the same. We have mutated. So all those cancer cells that might be present in a tumor don't all look alike. So we want a representative sample of all of the mutations that are existing within that tumor so that we can produce the most representative therapy to first alert the immune system as to what those cancer cells look like, and then second, deliver an army of killer T cells that are going to go after those specific cancer types. So we can talk a little bit about, I don't want to get all sciencey. That's not my profession. I'll let the scientists do that. But really just from a layperson's perspective, what is this therapy that we're talking about, personalized medicine? We call it it fits in the category of adoptive T cell therapy, but ours is a two-step process. We first vaccinate a patient with their own their own cancer cells. And we handle those cells in the lab, and we deactivate them so they're not going to produce more cancer once they're back in the patient. But what that does is alerts the immune system that, hey, these shouldn't be here. So the immune system then recognizes those cells through the vaccination, just like we've all done, with our COVID vaccines, those of us who have been able to get the COVID vaccines. Here's what the COVID cell looks like. You should be going after that. We're doing the same thing. Here's what the cancer cell looks like. You should be going after that. But cancer, as you mentioned, in the Emperor of All Maladies, cancer is very, very clever and very complex. So what we found and what we believe and what our intellectual property, our IP is all about is first educating the immune system with the vaccine, then collecting those educated T cells, bringing them into our lab and expanding the numbers and further activating them. So we deliver like a 1-2 punch, right? First, we're vaccinating, so the immune system recognizes, then we take those immune cells and we expand them into a large population and give that killer T cell army back to the patient to really do the heavy lifting.
What I like to, when I talk to pet parents about the potential of immunotherapy, I just say it's targeted, or personalized medicine is it's targeted, is that whereas you think of chemotherapy as just sort of it's a wide net, it's a broadcast, and immunotherapy is very targeted. And the fact that you're able to use the patient's own immune cells and learn from that, and then use that knowledge back against the cancer is really the brilliance, I think, behind immunotherapy. And also targeted therapy, personalized medicine is the future of cancer therapy, isn't it?
It really is. We believe it is the future. And again, it goes back to, even though we characterize cancers as osteosarcoma, they're really a mixture of lots of different mutations within those cells. And so, it's just the targeted approach, we believe, has the greatest possibility of producing more long-term survivors with lower side effects. So, as you were saying, many of the chemotherapies, the way they work is to kill all rapidly dividing cells, which is why people lose their hair. It's why dogs lose their whiskers. But with our therapy, we're coming in specifically looking for the cancer cell.
Tammie, where are you at? The potential is so exciting. And as you said, osteosarc, one of the top 5 cancers in dogs. I think it's 2, lymphoma being 1, osteo, 2, hemangio 3, something like that. So where is Elias Animal Health in the approval process? How quickly can you get this to pet parents?
Yeah. So we have conducted our preliminary trial. It was a trial of that enrolled 14 dogs. The results of that trial were published a couple of years ago and is available. That scientific publication is available for veterinarians to, review and understand what the potential is for this therapy. We have now also completed enrollment in our what is called a pivotal study, which is a larger study that we're using in pursuit of licensure. So that study is really kind of a landmark study. It's the first ever done in immunotherapy for cancer in dogs. It was a randomized study done at 10 veterinary specialty hospitals where we enrolled 100 dogs. Half of them were enrolled in our treatment arm. The other half were enrolled and received current standard of care, which is carboplatin. That data will be available at the end of 2020. So we have to follow those dogs for about an 18-month period. And then we'll be reporting out the results of that study and then seeking approval for the product based on the results of that study. So but the product, interestingly, is available today. And we have 50 hospitals that have been trained to offer this treatment to pet owners. We have 10 hospitals that are extremely active and are offering it all the time to pet owners. We're building that network every day. The data that we have is disclosed and discussed with pet owners. so that they can make an informed decision. And that's kind of a unique situation as an autologous therapy, that not all therapies would be available before full approval, but for our particular therapy, because it is the risk profile is very favorable. And so the USDA has authorized us to go ahead and sell the product, with all the appropriate caveats. So we have pet owners. We have treated, by the end of this week, we will have enrolled 199 dogs in
Wow.
our treatment.
Tammie, do you have a list of those clinics on your website that
We do have,
we
yeah,
could share those with our audience?
we do
And
have,
yes.
yes. And we're primarily in, the major metropolitan areas. But yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm a data guy, so I love data. So I want to break down some of the study. So the study's currently undergoing, correct? You have 199 dogs. And so are the dogs that are enrolled, they have no signs of metastasis at all to the lungs at all. So they're
so yeah, let me clarify that. We had 100 dogs 100 dogs enrolled in what we call the ECI OSA 4 study.
okay.
And about 50 of those were receiving our treatment. We aren't able to look at the data and communicate the data on that study until the end of this year.
Okay. I'm sorry. So we don't really know exactly to what extent it extends the prognosis of a bone cancer patient's life yet.
Yeah. So if you look at if you look at the preliminary study, the one that was done at Mizzou, the 14 dog study, with the caveat that that was a small study. But what we saw in that study, which is what gave us the confidence to go forward and enroll this big study for approval, was the results of those dogs. And it's pretty fascinating. Those 14 dogs, out of that group, 36% of them became long-term survivors, several of whom lived 5 years post-diagnosis and didn't die of cancer.
Wow.
So long-term being greater than 2 years, because as we know, is that 2 years is typically most bone cancer dogs don't live past the 2-year mark, even with amputation and chemo. So that's something else. But please don't misunderstand me. I love data, and I'm the kind of pet parent that even with we have thunderstorms in the background here, or storms. So hoping that the Fuzzybutts studio doesn't shut down. We lose our lights or something. I'm the kind of pet parent where I would expend all measures to save my boys. And so even though you only have an N of 12 in that study, with such promising, I'm sorry, N of 14, that 14. N of 14, even with that, I would do it. My second dog, Murphy, had nasal adenocarcinoma, and we did 28 days of IMRT, and that failed after 4 months. And so we did 3 days of high dosage radiation, and because he had a secondary tumor, a carcinoma in his nasopharynx, so it failed, and there was an additional cancer that was created, so it really failed, doubly failed. And I was just in such dire straits that I wanted to see if chemo as an adjunct would help. And I was talking to Steve Withrow out at CSU, and the only study that was available were I think it was 8 dogs in Australia. And it was not really conclusive, but I'm like, well, that's enough for me. I'm going to do it. So in N of 14 with those numbers, most pet parents, I think they're doing it. So I hope you didn't misunderstand. I just want some sort of data. Those are exciting numbers. It's exciting. And I'm with the regulatory agency. Let's go ahead and start getting that out to pet parents. And let's see. So as Ginger was saying, please let us know whatever we can do to promote and list those cross-link, and especially in our show notes, cross-link to those clinics that do have your therapy available. What is its name? It's not ECI OSA 4. What is its name?
Yeah. It's called ECI.
ECI. Okay. All right.
The Elias Cancer Immunotherapy. The oncologists call it ECI. And yeah, a couple of the other, important and impressive statistics from that first study is, median survival time of all of the dogs was 415 days. And what we know about, much of the historical carboplatin studies is they come in at around 270 to 300 days. So we did see, a nice improvement in that group of dogs in survival time, as well as at 1 year, we had 50% of the dogs still alive at 1 year and 36% alive at 2. So we were thrilled about those outcomes, and it gave us the resolve and the confidence to move forward into a larger randomized clinical trial. But it also, we also want to make sure that, we're following all the regulatory paths. But, a lot of pet owners don't want chemotherapy. It's a difficult decision, for someone to make. And, we are finding that there are a lot of pet owners that are choosing to go the immunotherapy route. And the safety, so the adverse events in that first trial were pretty much grade 1 and 2, so mild to moderate, very transient. Most of it did not require any medical intervention. So the dog would get his almost nothing with the vaccines. And then when they come in for the T-cell infusion, they will feel a little off for a day. But we have the veterinarians watch them closely, and they do quite well with this therapy.
Do they stay inpatient on the second, like for overnight or 24?
Yeah, it differs by hospital, but for the most part, what the hospitals are doing are getting the dog in first thing in the morning and getting that T-cell infusion on board by, say 10 o'clock. Then they can then the dog hangs out for the rest of the day at the clinic. And so they could just keep an eye on to make sure, he's not going to have some kind of a reaction. And then he goes home at the end of the day. If they do have some concern, then, he just stays overnight and continues to be monitored. Yeah.
If ECI becomes the gold standard of treating, let me ask you a question before I get to cost, because cost is where I want to go next. But I did have a question. With ECI, do you still recommend for pet parents to get amputation if amputation is viable for the bone cancer patient?
We do. Yeah,
Okay.
it's the way we get the most representative cancer tissue specimen.
I don't think that that's going to change really, because again, you want to get the tumor tissue out of the offending tissue out as quickly as possible. Okay, let's move on to so it's great you're already on the market. That's fantastic. I'm so are you publishing? How long has it been on the market? That's question number one. And then question number two, are you publishing the data in real time since it's available on the market, or how are you tracking that data that's for the patients that it's currently available to?
Yeah. So we began selling the product at roughly about the same time we completed that first clinical study. When we got the data from that study, then we felt like that now we had a very good idea. It was basically reconfirming what the human health company had seen in human patients with brain tumors. Then where they saw objective responses with patients with brain tumors, we now had evidence that we were seeing the same thing in dogs with osteosarcoma. So with that, we said we can go ahead and make it available. And so in late 2018, early 2019, we began to sell the product. So we've only really been selling it for a couple of years. During 2020, however, we were extremely focused on getting our big clinical trial enrolled. So if a dog qualified for the clinical trial, he just went into the clinical trial because it was more important to get that trial enrolled than it was to, generate revenue. So the data that we're generating, so you have these two groups, we call them the clinical trial dogs and then the non-clinical trial dogs, right? The commercial dogs.
Correct.
So the clinical trial dogs are being tracked very, very carefully in an electronic database because it's critically important that that data is clean and can be used for regulatory analysis purposes. The dogs who are not in the clinical trial, we actually are enrolling them in a long-term follow-up study. So we are monitoring and we follow those dogs about every 3 months for the first year, which is normally when they're coming in following treatment. And then they typically go to like a 6-month cycle, and then they'll go to an annual cycle. So over time, we will begin to build a very large database of how dogs do. We're collecting breed information on those dogs. We know what state, and in fact, even what city those dogs are in. So we're going to have a lot of data. We're also, to the extent possible, collecting any stories from the pet owners, right?
So anecdotal story is, and I think that's wonderful. That's great news because I didn't know how you termed it. There's the clinical trial data, which is the high quality data that's regulated, and then what you call the commercial
real world data. Yeah.
Real world, exactly. Out on the market data, which is equally important, but it's non-qualified. It's not the quality of data is not that as high as the clinical trial. So I'm glad you're tracking that, and I think that's wonderful because that sort of data, even though it's not qualified to the extent as the clinical trial data is, it's still very, very important to pet parents because they're going to make their treatment decisions based on that real-time, real-world data, and as quickly as you can get it back to pet parents as well. Because I think technology nowadays has lent itself some really exciting possibilities of tracking data in real-time situations. So I think that's exciting, and that's equally important for the second part of where I was going, and that is cost. So what is the cost of ECI compared to what we would consider, I guess? Well, let's just talk about the cost, and then we can talk about the cost compared to what the current gold standard treatment is for osteosarcoma.
Sure. And so I have to caveat it by saying, the cost is largely driven and determined by the hospital that is treating the dog. And that's going to vary a lot by geography, whether you're in major metropolitan centers or, as we know, the prices of things are different here in the Midwest than they are on the coast. What a lot of the veterinarians or oncologists are trying to do is keep it, and our goal is to keep it in the below $15,000 range. We only get a very small, piece of that because we're providing the therapy, we're providing the vaccines and the T cells, but the dog is going to undergo amputation. That's a major surgery. He's going to, be in the hospital for those visits. He's going to have an apheresis procedure done to collect those immune cells so that we can make the T cells. So all in, it's ranging between 10 and about 14 across all of the hospitals that we're, that we're aware of. The carboplatin can also range in the $8,000 to $10,000 rate price tag if you include the amputation as well. And those dogs are, for the most part, also being amputated. So, while we can't right now get it to the same price as the carboplatin, we're doing everything we can to keep it as affordable as possible.
Yeah, well, as you know, coming from the business background that I am, you have more precise tools, they're going to be more expensive. And that's just a reality. So I'm assuming that insurance covers immunotherapy. Your ECI is that there's no issue with coverage.
So actually, that's an area where we need some progress.
Okay.
Right now, the insurance industry typically covers the chemotherapies that are being used off-label. It's a human-approved product. It's not been approved for dogs, but they have made an exception to include those in the policies. We are not yet covered. The language in most of the insurance policies says they will cover approved products. So until we can get that USDA regulatory approval, or until there's a shift in the insurance industry, we won't be able to, the pet owners won't be able to cover the cost of our therapy. Now, amputations, unrelated, right? That should be covered under any of the existing insurance policies, because that is, first of all, the gold standard. Get that limb off of there to, stop the damage being done.
How long, what's the timeline? How long do you think it's going to take for, and you said it's the USDA?
Yes.
How long do you think it's going to take for the approval process and for you to be then covered by insurance, if you had to guess?
Yeah, so now I'm kind of looking in a crystal ball, right? So in my crystal ball, it looks like this. We're anticipating the data from the big study to be available for analysis in late 22. We're doing everything we possibly can to be ready to submit that data, within 3 months of say the end of October. Then it's probably a 3-month cycle for the regulators to get through their review process. So it could be, earliest, it could be mid 23 for full approval of the product, at which point it would be then covered by all insurance policies, or all insurance policies that cover cancer treatment.
And would ECI then be the first immunotherapy covered by insurance then? Are there any other immunotherapies that are currently available out there for any of the types of cancers in our canine companions?
I am not aware of any other immunotherapies that
Ginger, are you? Sorry,
been.
my apologies. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm not. I'm muted because I have a dog that does not like the storm and she's barking. So if you see a blank screen here, I've gone to get her. So yeah, I don't know of any of them, Luke.
Well then, wow, that's a wonderful precedence then that I hope that Elias sets, because I know that the regulatory process can be grueling, and it doesn't have necessarily the best interest of the pet parent in mind. So please let us know what we can do here at Fuzzybutts Studios and Fuzzybutts and Friends. I'm not sure what we can do, but at least we can have some voice for pet parents, is that whatever we can do. And I'm glad that it's already out there. I think that's whatever preliminary approval. I think that's phenomenal. That's almost like an orphan drug, I think, sort of. Is that right?
Yeah. You can kind of consider it. It's almost like compassionate use, or emergency care for a high unmet medical need. And, when we went through that process with the regulators, they looked at our safety profile and they looked at, and we have successfully had that authorization renewed every single year. We continuously submit all of our safety data and all of our treatment data. And so they look at it very closely. They're, they understand and are compassionate about the dilemma that pet owners and oncologists and veterinarians face with these dogs where there aren't good treatments available. They do have to work within the rules and legislation and policies that have been established. And so I respect that. But they have worked very closely with us to understand our product, and we're very pleased that we've been able to get that authorization renewed every single year, and we're really looking forward to having the opportunity to submit data from our large study. And it would be a landmark to be the first cancer immunotherapy product approved. That would be awesome.
I think that's wonderful, and it's great that you have to go through that. I'm not much of a rule follower myself, and that's probably not a good thing. But we need both. We need those that follow we need the rules, and we need those that follow the rules, and we need those that certainly don't follow them to push things along with a sense of urgency and haste, which is what pet parents want. We want treatments, better treatments now that we can afford. That's all we want. And whatever we can do, that's what we're focused on here at Fuzzybutts and Friends. And I got to tell you, I'm where I'm going with this, Tammie, is I know it's often criticized, the direct to consumer model for pharmaceuticals in the human drug trade, but that needs to happen in the vet drug business as well. As a pet parent, I want you to be able to go. I want Elias to be able to go and talk to me as a pet parent that has a dog with bone cancer. I'm not at all. Please, this could get me in a lot of trouble. If you listen to the show, you know that I'm a tremendous believer and advocate of going to a board certified veterinary oncologist. Even if you cannot afford the cost of therapy, unfortunately, given the economic realities, just go get the second set of eyes. Go to a board certified veterinary oncologist. So I believe in the procedures and how we have everything set up, but I believe that especially smaller biotech companies like yourself, Tammie, like Elias, is that you should be able to go and speak directly to the pet parents with bone cancer. So direct to consumer marketing and the veterinary pharmaceutical business is certainly, I'm a big proponent of that, and I want to see what we can do to move that along. Because we have, one of the great things about our foundation is we're putting together the infrastructure with our Puppy Up Walks to be able to get that data, that information out. So it's great that you have 50 clinics that are a part of that and helping you roll out. But whatever we could do here at Fuzzybutts and Friends as a platform to help get that information out to pet parents. One other thing I want to talk about briefly before we wrap up is I like what you said at the beginning, is that your immunotherapy really is a platform technology, right? And now you're going to be moving on to something beyond osteosarc, correct?
That's correct.
Well, that's exciting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we're not ready to announce at the moment which will be our next target, but yes, we're studying it very carefully.
Yeah, that's exciting, and definitely want to help with that. And Ginger pointed out that I think previously you had contacted the foundation because the Puppy Up Foundation, we fund scientific research. I don't know what the last number is, but it's we've done over 2 million to the entirety of our mission, of which scientific research is a part of that, the most significant part of that. And so Ginger had reminded me, I think that you had talk to us about potentially helping you with the clinical trial. we've had historically a scientific advisory board to sort of make those decisions. It's been kind of expensive to support from an infrastructure standpoint, and we invested a lot of money in our scientific advisory board, and we're sort of rethinking that the model in terms of how we address and how we do research, because the reality is that the Puppy Up Foundation is not a big foundation. None of the foundations that are, other than Morris being the largest one, other than Morris, is that everyone else, and there are only really a handful, are fairly small. And research is expensive, especially if you're going to do a clinical trial of 199 dogs. What is that? $10,000 a dog? I think that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So one of the things that one of the things I want to accomplish, many things I want to accomplish with the foundation, is to be able to syndicate financing clinical trials with some of the smaller nonprofits and charities that are doing research in companion cancer. So we'll enable, like the Puppy Up Foundation, be able to afford to help finance larger clinical trials. So I do hope our experience with funding clinical trials and dealing with scientific advisory boards, it's enlightening. I've had experience in my previous life in high tech and biotech in Texas, but I think the scientific model that we're going to adopt in the future is certainly one that's going to be geared towards where we can do larger trials, because we need that. Because even though Morris is doing that great, wonderful golden retriever study, that's still a rounding error compared to big pharma. And what we really need is big pharma and their deep pockets, but they're only interested in funding targeted therapy, which is great for you. So hopefully ECI is going to be a success, and then you're going to build out that pipeline and use that as a platform technology, and then build up that pipeline, and then sell off Elias, and then use that to put more money into clinical trials in translational and comparative oncology, because we certainly need more money. Tammie, it's been great. Well, one more thing before I go, because I know we're really pushing it. You're very busy, and I appreciate the time. But I want to open the platform to talk about anything you want to talk about, and one final message to pet parents you may have.
Okay, sure. So, one final message to pet parents is there are treatment options available. I completely agree. If you get that diagnosis, seek out a second opinion before you have surgery done. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about an osteosarcoma dog or, a lymphoma dog or, a soft tissue sarcoma dog. Seek out a second opinion so that you can really evaluate what other options are available. With our therapy, although we are primarily focused on osteosarcoma, we have treated a number of other types of cancers. We had, in fact, in our clinical trial, we had a dog enroll who they thought was, osteosarcoma, but when the pathology came back, it was a different type of sarcoma. The good news for that dog was, although he didn't qualify for the clinical trial because it was very strict on cancer type, he was able to be treated with our therapy outside of the clinical trial. Again, because we started with the cancer cells and we didn't really need to specify what the cancer was. The immune system does that. So, there are new treatment options on the market today. There are new treatment options coming down the pipeline. So, remain hopeful, remain persistent. We sometimes laugh about Dr. Google, but do Google it and see what you can find, and ask your family veterinarian and oncologist about the immunotherapies, because they do have a place in the suite of tools that we use to treat cancer.
That's a great way to bring us in full circle back to the scenario that I created and leave it on an optimistic note, because I do believe I am optimistic, even though I'm an alarmist and I shudder to fear one possible future of cancer in our companion animals, because I've lost 100% is my number 3 to cancer that I've had die from cancer, and that's just unacceptable. So it's great work that you're doing with Elias, and I look forward to it. And if we're able to have treatment options that can substantially improve the outcome, right? And extend the prognosis and the survival rate, right? If we can do that, then hopefully that'll give us time to then address preventative, right? And to understand better risk factors and then prevention and stuff. So I'm very excited, Tammie, what the work that you're doing at Elias Animal Health. And you indeed are a friend of the Fuzzybutts, and you're welcome back on our show anytime to talk about the work you're doing there. Ginger, did I miss anything today?
I don't think so. I think you got it all.
All right. Anything
All right.
else?
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with both of you, and look forward to seeing you again in the future.
I'm sure we'll run into each other at some place this year.
I hope.
I hope so. Until such time. Well, that concludes this episode of Fuzzybutts and Friends. Puppy up. Talk soon.
Puppy up.
Puppy up.
I love that. Thank you.